Why should I care is just such an amazing question, and I guess I think that we should care about this because my experience, probably a little bit as a family doctor, but certainly as a member of Parliament, that the relationships that I've built with First Nations, Inuit and Métis people in Canada have just made my life so much richer. That this is a really important relationship that will be built nation to nation, but it's also going to be built Canadian by Canadian in terms of us not being afraid. So how many here would self-identify as First Nations, Inuit, or Métis? Okay, well, I hope you will all. Oh, I see back there. So I just hope that every one of you here will leave with a new friend. Now, they're a bit outnumbered, but I think that this is so serious to me. And I think that some of the work that is happening at the friendship centers and all across this country, where there are events you can go to, there are events where you will be very welcomed, and I guess I was going to give the homework at the end, but I'll give it now. That if each of you would make sure that you've seen Eighth Fire, the 4-part documentary on CBC, read Thomas King's The Inconvenient Indian, get out there. John Ralston Saul's A Fair Country is not a bad little primer as to how we can get there together, and for heaven's sakes watch APTN. That more and more people during the Idle No More would come up to me and say, if I really want to know what was happening in Idle No More, I watched APTN. And I think that Idle No More has become for me the mantra of my job, which is Idle Can No More. And it means that my job is to for the 96% of us not from an Indigenous background, for us to actually understand the shared history, the tragedy in some of that shared history, but that the optimism comes from when countries have decided to really take this on seriously. And so I often talk about New Zealand, where Maori studies is taught kindergarten to grade 8, that it's a little easier because it's 20% of the population and pretty well mainly one language, but that you can see that the identity, the Maori identity, in the identity of all New Zealanders. This is just not the opening ceremonies at the Olympic Games. This is actually a real relationship and a respect that from the haka ceremony, from the football team to the armed forces, to actually that you wouldn't catch a Kiwi child sitting on a table or a desk because it's against Maori culture. So, you know, there's a lot that we need to understand, and I think that the wise ways and good ways that were here before colonization are something that I think we've got to understand, that thinking 7 generations out is a pretty good idea in terms of the land that we borrow from our children and our grandchildren. The fact that the pedagogy of learning by doing now is incorporated in adult education. Is pretty well the great teachers that we had were the ones who knew that we could learn math in the grocery store, not in little tiny lines copying from the blackboard. That the idea that the great leaders are asking, not telling, is an Indigenous way of leading, which is you gotta have everybody with you if you're going to make a big decision, and that means asking the elders, which leads to, I think, one of the most amazing things is my grandparents died when I was very little, and I was quite scared of old people. The idea that in Canada, I mean, it's elders versus elderly, and that we don't actually respect the wisdom of the people who've seen it before. And I guess, you know, in terms of thinking 7 generations south, nobody had to tell them that clear cutting wasn't a good idea, or fishing out a lake, that they actually needed the fish, and they needed what the trees brought them. And so it's been a joy that every week there's a eureka moment of something I really didn't know, and it's been very exciting, I think, to see that the Idle No More movement came out of those 4 women in Saskatchewan as a kind of teach-in that worked through the various pieces of legislation, worked through why they were worried about downloading environment to the provinces when First Nations have a relationship with the Crown, not with the provinces, to the navigable waters that would no longer be protected, and that they wanted everybody to understand what these changes in the legislation was going to be about. And so one of the first I don't know more rallies on the Hill that I spoke at on December 21st, I was saying that in my riding we have the Native Men's Residence, the homeless shelter. Steve's on the board. This is changing people's lives one by one by one. But I sat there, I took in my Christmas cookies, I thought that was it, and all of a sudden one of them said to me, "What's an omnibus bill?" And then the next guy said, "Are my treaty rights being infringed upon?" And that to be able to tell that story at the rally, I think meant that people understand that this is very deep now in terms of the consciousness raising. This is so unbelievably important that as Todd said in the 250th anniversary of the Royal Proclamation, that meant that we share this land fairly, that we are all treaty people. Our signatures either there on behalf of Indigenous ancestors or settlers, and both sides signed that, and we have to honor it, whichever side we see ourselves in terms of honoring those treaties. And so it's I think a very hopeful time that from Ring of Fire, and I think the serious negotiations that will go on there between mining companies and First Nations and the province, that we're going to start to see hopefully a breakthrough in how the richness of this land will be shared fairly, and that that First Nations will be able to have the resources and sharing the resources to look after themselves without this paternalism and mother may I, red light, green light. I mean, dealing with the Department of Indian Affairs is like some sort of children's game of may I please, sir, have more, or and I think that's what's been so exciting for me over this time of all of these horrible statistics, that we see the shining light of this generation of professionals coming out who really know what needs to be done, but they also have deep in their hearts the culture and the history. I learned a little bit when I was the Minister of State for Public Health, and that we were pushing hard on social determinants of health. The WHO had launched the commission. We sent Monique Desjardins as our representative. We really felt that we wanted to do better on poverty, violence, the environment, shelter, equity, education. We knew we want more health and therefore to need less health care. That's the way you get there. You want clean air, not poppers and respirators for all. But in the war that was public health then, the war between the Dennis Raphaels of It's Poverty Stupid and the Choose Health people that was breaking out in England about if people would just stop smoking, exercise nicely, eat properly, that they would all stay healthy, and there was not an understanding how those two things work together. And I remember scribbling on a boarding pass, what if the social determinants were the roots And then what if the choices were the trunk? And then what if the outcomes were whether you had healthy branches, healthy leaves, in terms of, and this would be probably health outcomes as well as educational outcomes, economic outcomes. And I presented the tree over the 2 years I was minister, and everybody had advice for my tree. Everybody wanted to put more things on the tree, but the best piece of advice I had was from Bill Musso from the Native Mental Health Association, who said, Carolyn, your tree needs ground. The ground will be secure personal cultural identity. That it's your self-esteem, it's the resilience, it's your sense of control over your own life. And without that ground, people don't make healthy choices. People can't make healthy choices. And so that you end up with all different people with maybe the same exposure in social determinants, but something's different in the people who know who they are and feel good about who they are. And I think that's the reason now that as we talk about education to both First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and non-Aboriginal Canadians, that somehow we've got to join that piece again. And it's been very interesting in my writing. The Jewish community seems to now really understand, and there was this amazing event at the Native Center between Holocaust survivors and residential school survivors, and the intergenerational trauma that takes place in both of those communities, and that what happens when somebody tries to take your language and culture away is something that I think we've got to do a much better job in having all Canadians understand what that meant. That what child abuse means in terms of addiction. We, over here on Dundas at the Women's Own Detox, I remember once asking what percentage of the inhabitants there, the clients there, would have had child abuse as a background. And I think the executive director told me 110%. Like, that it was almost every single client and some more than once. And having to numb yourself out to the kind of not being able to trust authority, all of those things that feed in to why we as Canadians need to understand that the lack of success of First Peoples in Canada has very much to do with this period, this very, very dark period where the paternalism, the Indian Act, the residential schools, and the 60s scoop. So I just want to say thank you all for being here. It's hugely important that each one of you now feels deputized to go out and have a tough conversation with somebody saying something that is a stereotype. For you to actually deal straight on with racism and sexism and the kinds of things that actually are affecting people every single day, and that we all feel that we will be part of some really exciting solutions as we all idle know more and are prepared to really put our shoulders to the wheel and work with First Nations, Inuit, Métis. They know what has to be done. We just have to help them do it.